So welcome to part 6 of our equine pasture management series. We're going to call this the fall renovation. We're looking at August 24th today. And so we have a few days as we start to come upon our time when we can start thinking about doing some of these things. Historically speaking, we're kind of already in that fall renovation period, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But this is meant to give us some planning for our fall, some things to kind of evaluate our pastures and see, are there some things that we can do to improve them for the next season, or can we just add some nutrients to what our current stand is and really boost that stand through the fall. So we'll get started as we go through here. If there's any questions, we'll try to take those as we go, but we'll also have some time at the very end to catch any of those questions as they come. So I'm sure a lot of you kind of have felt this way when you're getting ready to, especially if you're a new farm owner or you haven't had any experience really dealing with your pastures, is you have no idea what I'm doing here. And I've kind of found this as I was looking through trying to find some good photos to use, and it just dawned on me this is a perfect scenario. And a lot of times this can be used in many different applications that we talk about regarding our farms. There's just no way you can know all of it. And you just have no idea what to do, where to start from there. And so it's always good to have somebody you can go to, reflect back on it, and ask a few questions and probably get the right lead to it. So we're hoping that this next little thing will get us caught up on some steps we can take towards our fall renovation. This is a slide that we have used in one of our past segments. I think it was in one of our first two, trying to understand just the way our grasses grow. But it's good to reflect back on that. So as we look at it, we're looking at two different curves as far as cool season, which are our fescue. These are the grasses that have been struggling all summer long. They really thrive in the spring and then to some degree in the fall. You can see the growth curve. This is like your tall fescue orchard grass. Really starts to peak in mid-spring, really starts to come down and goes down pretty hard. The good thing about tall fescue compared to other ones, it does actually kind of survive through these months. It's struggling real hard. We do have some loss of our fescues, but it is able to survive mostly through June, July, August, and early September. As the cool mornings start to hit us, the cool evenings, we start to get a refresh of that grass, and it's got a kind of a second wind to get us back up through fall and the early part of winter. The growth curve below is where we have our summer grasses, our warm season grasses, like Bermuda, which is a common example of it. Starts to come out slow towards the end of spring. It's starting to go up as the temperatures start to rise. The evening temperatures don't drop near as much. This stuff starts to really thrive through June, July, August. And as we start to get those cooler nighttime temperatures, slightly less daytime temperatures, shorter days, we start to see a decrease in the quality of the warm season. And all of a sudden, as soon as we get that first heavy frost, it all completely goes away. And so I always like for people to take a good analysis of where their stands are at when you hit that first frost. Especially if you haven't done anything, you're trying to decide if maybe that next year if you need to do something. That first frost hits, you're going to see all the warm season grasses, weeds, everything turn brown. It's going to wilt and die. And then the only thing left really, because our springtime weeds or our cool season weeds really haven't started to come on yet. The only thing that's going to be left are really your cool season perennial grasses like your fescue and your orchard grass. So that gives us a pretty good idea of where our stand lies for our cool season forages. But unfortunately, it's a little too late to do anything for this past fall. But it does let you know you need to be doing something for the current or the upcoming year. So good opportunity is when that heavy frost hits. And then this is another one. And this is where we started to look at, we're talking about in the spring is, do I seed in the spring or reseed in the spring, or do I wait to the fall? And this is where we kind of talked about the issues that we have with you doing it during the springtime, the competition from other grasses, the new weeds that are starting to pop up. We had a drought that past spring, or can you you potentially have one. And then just the heat of the summer and other horses being on it. So we had a really low success rate. So we advised at that time, save your money and invest your money in prepping for this fall and hoping that this fall would be a good opportunity to reseed. And so before we ever get started on anything, we like to go back to, when in doubt, give us the most information possible to be able to arm ourselves to get the best success rates. And with that comes our soil test. We got to make sure, if you haven't done it now before this, but get your soil test done so you can put your lime down, make sure your pH is correct as you start to go do some reseeding, because that's where your grass is really going to thrive the most, is when it has at the correct pH. And then make sure our other nutrients are right there along the line. So we start to show you exactly how to take that soil sample and then get us that information. And we're going to talk a little bit about one of those nutrients that we want to talk about is fertilizer. We're going to mention that here in a second. But key is, how do I know when to start? Everybody always comes up and asks, okay, what's the day or the timeline that I need to start? And, to give you a real general timeline, August 15th to October 1st is one. But if you look at the last 4 years, late August and September have been extremely dry, and the temperatures have stayed well into the 90s during these time periods. Well, for reseeding, when we talk about cool evenings, moisture in the ground, that's just a terrible time to be doing it. So you can't necessarily go by the calendar to know when to do it. You have to go by more of what does the environment, what does the weather tell you is a good time to do it. Like I said, we talk about August to September being really hot and dry. And typically November is a little bit cooler. So that window to get that grass started in the ground and up and going, the earlier the better. Well, these past 3, 4, 5 years, it stayed hotter later, but it's also stayed warmer further into November and December. So this has lengthened our growing season. It's just pushed it back further into the fall and then lengthened it a little bit later into that late fall, early winter. But it all is dependent upon the environment that we see. So, in the second tab, I talk about weather and environment dependent. And the next line, we talk about the fall of 2016. But the weather means, do you have those cooler evenings? Is the nighttime temperature dropping down into the low 60s or upper 50s? This is going to be better for the environment for germination. And we still have daytime temperatures that are creeping up into the upper 70s, 80s along the way, which would be ideal for growth. Environment dependent. Does our ground look like this cracked, barren desert? If it is, that's obviously not going to be a really good environment for getting our grass to grow. We need to have some moisture in the ground. We need it to be further than just a half an inch deep as far as the moisture. We need some good depth on our moisture because as far as seeding, it just won't germinate and grow in an environment like this. So looking to see what our environment is going to look like. Looking down the line to see, are we going to have any rain in the upcoming future? Because we can put that grass out there and get it out there, and then all of a sudden, if the faucet shuts off, then we've lost our money on this. So trying to look down the line, see what the future lies, and it's hard to gauge weather, but get an idea, is the weather pattern going to hold consistent so that we can get good growth and good life on our grass? And the thing to remember is, you always can have the fall of 2016. Late August, early September, it was starting to get dry, but people assumed that, and our office would be the same thing, assumed that we're going to have a typical fall and the rain will come. So people were still drilling or seeding their grass seed, and with the hope that the fall rains would eventually come. Well, they never actually came. So that grass seed, some of it did end up germinating when we got some rains in late November, but a lot of it never germinated. So, best laid plans can go awry, even though you did everything correctly. And then one thing is just to be cautious on fertilizer. If you're planning on reseeding, don't throw a bunch of fertilizer on your grass before you get started, because all that's going to do is increase all the plants that are already in the environment. they're going to shoot up real fast, and they're going to have increased competition, which is going to be a big problem for any of the new seedlings trying to pop up. So when we start looking at, let's start looking at our prep work. How do we need to evaluate some things. We need to see what our actual game plan is going to be. So one of them to look at is look at your stand percentage. And when I talk about that, I'm talking more about your grass. Do you have a field that has a 70% coverage of good grass? Or do you have a stand that has a 30% coverage of good grass? And that can help tell us is, do we need to do more of a total renovation or reseeding along the ways? And making sure we have the grasses that we really want. So you really need to go out there and evaluate and see what kind of grass you have, and is it the correct, is it the amount that you want? Because remember, any place where grass is not growing, that's a good opportunity for weeds to pop up. So we like to have a really good stand that will help suffocate out other weeds. Making sure you have the other grasses, have the grasses that you want. Like I said, the freeze or the frost is a really good opportunity to evaluate. The unfortunate part is it's just a little bit late in the year to be able to do anything once you identify what you have. But it can help for on down the line. But making sure you have the right grass, you can look out there right now and it might be all green. And as soon as you get that frost, all of a sudden you're down to a 30% stand. So you really need to be able to help identify the grass that you want. If it's a cool season, is it tall fescue or is it orchard grass? So that you can identify what it is and know how your stand looks. Identify your weed pressure. You need to be able to know if you have a bunch of weeds in there, that's going to play a role in getting your grass to germinate. If you have all kinds of competition, it's going to be harder for those little blades of grass to get up and get going, get enough nutrients that the other grasses and other weeds are not taking. And then knowing if you're doing a total reseed or if you're doing reseeding or a total renovation. Both involve little extra things, a little bit different approach to each one of them. But if you've got something that's got a 20% stand, maybe you're looking at doing a little bit more of a total renovation. And so it's going to involve more seed at a higher density rate. If you've got a stand that's somewhere in that 70% range, reseeding is obviously the route that we should go here. We just want to fill in those little gaps to prevent any type of weeds from popping up. So when we start talking about prep, when we talk about total renovation, in that case, most likely what you're going to want to do is put glyphosate, or for a lot of people, the term is Roundup. We want to do that at least 2 weeks prior to seeding. And then this will give us opportunity. Typically, we don't need to worry as much about that stand as far as germination and affecting the germination of the seed, but at least gives us a safe window to be able to do that. So we come in there and we spray everything, and that kills hopefully all the weeds, all the other grasses that it actually touches. One of the things, and it's the same for reseeding, is whenever you kill a bunch of things, if you don't give it appropriate amount of time to actually break down, then your seed bed, when you plant your seed, it's actually sitting in decaying material. So ideally you come through there and clip it a month and keep it clipped relatively short. And then so when you come through and do your total kill, there's not that much to decay and break down. And the same thing goes with the reseeding. So if you've got heavy weeds, you want to apply a herbicide to try to reduce that weed pressure so you have less competition when your grasses start to come up. So you want to do that no later than 1 month prior to reseeding. And the same thing goes with clipping your pasture and spraying your weeds. If you spray a bunch of really tall weeds and kill them, that's going to take longer for it to decay and break down. So you want to try to keep that mowed and sprayed pretty low so that you don't have that decaying material, because any place where you have that decaying material and you plant a seed in the decaying material, you're not going to get germination on your seed. So that we have two different options that we talk about when it comes to planting. And there's varying positives and negatives for each one of them. And we'll just kind of go through, and you just have to assess the situation that you have on your pasture to see which is the method that's going to work best for you. Drilling is one of these methods and this is a picture of an actual drill. There are a lot of small pasture drills out there. If that doesn't work for you and you don't want to do your own equipment, you can always do custom work, hire somebody to do custom work that has one. Or you can go to someplace like the NRCS or the Williamson Farmers Co-op or whatever co-op you actually go to or where you live. And most of them will have a seed drill that you can rent. And so what this does is this automatically plants your seed at the same depth all the way across and incorporates that seed into the ground. This other method we're going to talk about, broadcasting, does not do that. So you have to weigh the advantage and disadvantage of it. So first, you have to have the right conditions. Last fall, we got into the point where people were still trying to reseed, even though we were having some really, really extreme dry conditions in October. And it takes a certain amount of pressure for that drill to compress that seed into the ground. Well, we got to the point where in October, that drill would just bounce off the ground like it was concrete, because it really was just concrete. So we couldn't go through there and use a drill to reseed because it would not puncture the ground. So you have to make sure you have the right conditions there. You have to make sure that you don't have too much slope. Trying to pull a drill on the side of a hill becomes very difficult, and sometimes it will not work at all to do that. Also, if you have really rocky ground, that's going to go across the ground, and it's going to try to plant everything at the same depth. It does not have any type of sensor that makes it realize that there's a rock there. So if you have a bunch of really, really rocky ground, you have an opportunity maybe to tear up the drill because it's going to try to compress a seed into a rock or stone and may break the drill. So kind of make sure that your environment's correct in order to use the drill. But the good thing is, like I said, you can set the depth. We like our seeding depth to be about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch, somewhere in there, no more than 1/2 an inch. You start to get into 1/2 an inch, and the seed cannot make it through the ground. It cannot puncture through the ground, and so it's just you lose your germination right there. So no more than 1/2 an inch. The 1/2 an inch is probably ideal right there. So we can go ahead and get that into the ground. It's already incorporated into the soil, which gives it protection and moisture along the way. So once you come down here, we get back into that pasture quality where it talks about rock slope. Another thing we talk about are grass clumps. You know, you don't think about it, but if you're doing reseeding, everywhere where you have a grass clump and that drill runs over it, or you've got a seed, if it plants it in the grass clump, it's not going to germinate in the grass clump. It's only going to germinate where it has contact with the soil. So, you know, it's something just to be aware of from that aspect. But drilling, it's a good opportunity to get consistent depth. It's going to plant. You're going to see kind of grass planted in straight rows, and just making sure that the conditions work well for what you're trying to do. And there are plenty of people out there doing custom work, and so you can contact your extension, or a lot of times where you're purchasing the seed, they'll have a list of people that will do custom work. The second option is a little bit more variable, but we call it broadcasting. A lot of times you'll see this in your home yards, but there's different sizes of broadcasters. What this allows us to do is on more difficult terrain. Now, we might not necessarily be able to have a tractor, but you can get a hand seeder or a push behind seeder like this on the bottom picture that allow us to spread the seed on a more difficult terrain, especially if you've got rocks. You know, you're not worried about running your drill or breaking your drill by doing it, so you can push a hand seeder out there. So you're going to get greater coverage. It's not going to plant in a row. It's going to do a spread, real just kind of unbiased spread out there. So you're going to get pretty good coverage of seed, and you can put it on pretty heavy if you want. It could be cheaper. It just depends on what you own and the size of and the amount of space you're looking to do. You know, you don't necessarily have to own the equipment, the tractor, or the drill to be able to go do the broadcast seeding. There's a few other things that you might want to have in order to incorporate and get the best success. But it is a little bit more variable because you are not putting it in direct contact with the soil. And once again, that is the most important part. And we'll kind of finish up on that at the very end. But that's the most important part, is get direct contact with the soil to get good germination. So broadcasting, it's really 3 different steps. And we talked the first part about get in contact with the soil. So if you are not going to drill it, if you just went ahead and spread your seed out on the ground, you're going to get very, very, very low success rate. Maybe you get 10% success rate on your germination. And that just happened to be where maybe the horse walked over a piece of ground and stomped the seed into the ground and not too far, didn't compact it too much, that allows it to come up. But so if you go through and scratch the surface of your pasture, you can get a small little disc like the one that's pictured here. Go through there, scratch the surface. What that does is that breaks up the soil and allows that seed to be able to fall down into the soil and incorporate itself into the soil. Like I said, you just throw it out on the top of the ground. It'd be like throwing it out on top of the paved parking lot. You're just not going to get any success rate. So first thing is you've got to allow that opportunity for that grass seed to get into the ground, and doing a little scratching with a little disc like this is ideal. Next, you're going to come through and broadcast your seed. You're going to put on a pretty heavy load depending on the amount of reseeding or total renovation that you're doing, but you're going to have a pretty good coverage. Like I said, you can use more of this commercial large seeder for large fields, or if you've got a smaller one, you can do a little pull behind, like kind of four-wheeler lawnmower, or you can do a little push one if you've got a small enough acreage. And finally, we want to go back through and cover it up. So get a simple chain drag. You can get a chain link fence, section of chain link fence, and just pull it behind your lawnmower if you've got a small enough acreage. But what we want to do is try to further incorporate that grass seed and cover it up to prevent it from drying out. So if you'll drag it over, if we can go back through our fields and see less than 20% of the grass, then that means we're in pretty good shape. So we'd like 80% of that grass seed to be covered up just with a light layer of dirt. And so that what that does is that keeps that seed nice and moist. Hopefully we get a good rain after that, and prevents it from drying out. If it's just sitting on top of the soil, you've got a chance that the sun's going to come through and dry it out. That's why when you go through a bunch of yards, you'll see them put straw over the top or cow manure over the top of the grass. That just prevents the sun from drying that seed out before it can really start to germinate. So going back over with your chain drag, your harrow, anything like that, and covering up that seed gets it further incorporated in the soil and prevents it from drying out. So the keys, we just talked about it, contact and moisture. You want to make sure that seed has a good contact with the soil, not more than a half an inch deep, and then we have some good moisture within the soil to begin with. You don't want to plant it into dry dirt, and then hopefully we'll get a good rain right after that. Not a gully washer, but enough rain to really provide moisture for that grass and get it up and going. You're looking at probably 10 to 14 days, depending on the daytime temperature, to get that grass seed up and going. So making sure you have enough seed. We're looking at 15 to 25 pounds, depending on reseeding versus renovation, but probably more than that 15 to 20 for reseeding. We want to make sure we have reduced competition. That's why we clip the grass off really low when we get ready to seed. So the older grass will have to start and not shade out the other grass as it's going. So hopefully the new grass will be up and going before it gets shaded out by the older grass. And it's where we also try to go through there and reduce our weed competition, and then hope to get rainfall. But reduced competition is really big. That's why, like I said, we clip it off really low at the very beginning before we seed, to try to give those new seedlings the best opportunity to get up and going. Once the grass is up and going, then we can come back through and put a little fertilizer on there. Hopefully that will get the new seedlings a boost, as well as giving that new grass or the older grass that we have out there a good shot of life as well. So the take home from here is just weed control after seeding. So something to think about is a lot of us may see some weeds pop up right after we go out there and seed. Do not go out there and try to spray your weeds after you've just seeded new grass in there. You'll have lots of germination problems. So once you've gone ahead and reseeding, so a lot of times it's hard to think about it in the fall, but you kind of have to make that decision that if you're going to reseed in the fall, that you're probably not going to do any type of weed control. Don't put a pre-emergent and don't put any contact sprays on our grass You're just going to have to live with the weeds. Once you've planted your grass, you're going to have to live with the weeds that are in there. Probably for that fall, you might be able to get them in a late winter, but you may have to go back to early spring to get them. But once you've put the grass in the ground, we don't want to put any type of herbicide, pre-emergent or post-emergent, on that grass, because that will severely affect our germination rates. And the hardest part that we always get into is the biggest detriment to your success is when you put those horses on there. And the reason why we do fall is it can give us 2 rainy seasons. If all works out well, we get a fall rainy season, and then we get a spring rainy season, and hopefully that grass is really ready to go. But if you put horses out on your pasture prior to spring, your success rate of all your grasses, all your time and effort is going to be just terrible. You're just not going to have the success that you'd hope for and plan for if you put them on there much before mid-spring. You just got to let that root system get set. Those are really very small blades of grass that will later on in the springtime start to form clumps of grass and start to have a more set root system. But if you don't allow that to happen, then they're just going to pull those little blades of grass up, and your success rate, and you're going to be awfully disappointed and maybe come back and think the seed didn't do its job, but more likely just getting the horses on there too early. So this is where I really like to utilize the rotational grazing system and trying to come up with a plan for our pastures that is a multi-year plan. And the fact that if let's say you've got 4 paddocks that you've broken up for your rotational grazing, just plan on reseeding 3 of those, either reseeding or renovating 3 of them, and leaving 1 to be sacrificed. And what I mean sacrificed is in the fall, you put the horses on that 4th paddock, and they stay there all the way through until springtime, until mid-springtime. This is also what we'll have an entirely different session later on in October regarding winters and how do we utilize our pastures and save our pastures during winter. But this is where you could use a heavy use lot as well. But utilizing that 4th paddock, put them on there, leave them on that paddock until springtime, and then you can start rotating your pastures that you just reseeded, the other 3, in the springtime. Then when it comes back to the fall, you can rotate your horses to one of those other paddocks if you want and reseed that 3rd one and maybe do a total renovation on that one you left from the previous fall. And then you can also reseed the other 2. And so you just continually rotate your pastures as far as which one you're going to sacrifice in the fall and which ones you're going to renovate. And so this way you're getting to utilize all the rotational grazing, and you're getting your money's worth for all the time and effort you put into renovating those pastures or reseeding them. Like I said, if you let them get on there during the fall or even during the winter, all they're going to do is tear it up. So this is another good reason to have rotational grazing. Like I said, once again, on the 2 rainy seasons, this is something you get to add. So we've reached the end of this one. We'll take questions at the very end. Our next session, we actually have our UT equine specialist, Dr. Jenny Ivy, is going to do a understanding your hay analysis test in a little bit more depth. She's actually scheduled to be with us quite a few times through the rest of this fall with a variety of topics. She is a nutrition specialist, so we have a lot of nutrition topics that we're going to cover for senior horses, young horses, and a lot of different opportunities for you guys. Through the surveys that was mentioned, this was a hot topic that you'd like more information on. So Dr. Ivy is going to provide these opportunities over the next 2 or 3 months. So the next one will be Wednesday, August 30th at 12 o'clock. Seeing no questions, I will stop and see if there's any questions at the end.